Get your hands off my wife. Chuck's voice was low, steady, almost too calm. The officers froze, taser wires still crackling as Maria gasped on the ground. One officer laughed nervously until Chuck took a single step forward. No yelling, no threats, just the kind of silence that makes grown men forget how to breathe. What happened next? It didn't just shake the precinct. It sent the entire city into chaos. Welcome to Chuck Norris Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. Chuck Norris and Maria had been looking forward to a rare, peaceful day together. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet park where they had decided to take a walk. The air was cool, and the rhythmic sound of their footsteps on the gravel path was all that could be heard as they made their way toward a small bench near the lake. It was a time for reflection, just the two of them, away from the chaos of the world. But peace can be fleeting when danger lurks in the shadows. As they neared the bench, a black SUV pulled up nearby, and the sound of tires screeching against the pavement drew their attention. 4 uniformed officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the park as though they were on a mission. Chuck's instincts immediately went on high alert. He had been in enough situations to know when something wasn't right. Before Chuck could process it further, one of the officers, obviously on edge, approached Maria. His voice was harsh, demanding that she stop walking. Chuck moved swiftly, stepping between his wife and the officer, his voice steady but firm. "What's going on here?" The officer, flanked by his colleagues, sneered, stepping closer. "Just keep walking, old man. This doesn't concern you." But Chuck's presence was enough to make him pause, even if for just a moment. Maria's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, another officer moved in, his hand hovering over his taser. In an instant, without warning, the officer discharged the taser, striking Maria squarely in the chest. She staggered backward, falling to the ground with a sharp gasp. Chuck's heart stopped. The sight of his wife in pain was like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, his body moving instinctively, but the officers quickly surrounded her, forcing him to stay back. A wave of fury washed over him, but he held himself in check. This was just the beginning, and he would make sure it would be the last time they got away with something like this. The world shifted in the moment Maria hit the ground. 1 second they'd been sharing a quiet smile. The next, the air hummed with pain and confusion. Chuck dropped beside her, ripping a piece of cloth from his jacket to press against the sizzling burn on her chest. Maria's hand trembled against his, her dark eyes wide in shock. Around them, the officers formed a circle, their faces masks of disengagement, as if they were watching collateral damage rather than a wounded woman. A sudden shout broke through the haze, Maria's voice soft but fierce. She pushed herself up, leaning into Chuck for support, her jaw set with a determination that matched his own. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, voice quivering yet unwavering. The lead officer looked down at her with a shrug that felt colder than the evening air. "Protocol," he said, as if that single word could justify the electric agony coursing through her. Chuck's grip tightened on her arm. Every instinct screamed to disarm, to retaliate, but he held back. His years of discipline had taught him that fury, however righteous, could cloud judgment. He glanced at Maria's face, saw the pain there, and forced himself to breathe. He would need his head clear for what was coming next. An eyewitness family huddled nearby, their children's faces pale as they watched Maria's trembling form. One of the officers barked an order, and the family backed away, fear in their eyes. The park's tranquility had evaporated, replaced by a charged tension that hovered in the gathering twilight. Chuck helped Maria to her feet. Her body stiffened with each movement, but her gaze never wavered from the officers. They were beyond reason now. This was bigger than a misunderstanding. He stepped forward, voice low and controlled. "You owe her an explanation." The officers exchanged glances, uneasy for the first time. As they escorted Maria to their SUV under the guise of medical attention, Chuck followed, refusing to be cowed. The park's calm was gone, shattered by injustice. And now, fueled by that same injustice, Chuck Norris would make sure every last truth came to light. Maria's vision swam as the back door of the SUV slammed shut. Chuck's hand slipped from hers, and for a heartbeat, panic seized him. Then the door clicked, locking them inside. The lead officer swung open the front door, signal clear. Two officers climbed in and slammed the back seats forward, forcing Chuck and Maria apart. Maria winced, clutching her chest, but her eyes found his. He nodded. They'd faced this together. The SUV roared to life and sped off toward the station, its siren silent, but its intent unmistakable. In the cramped back seat, Maria pressed her hand against the bruising welt where the taser's prongs had struck. Chuck leaned close, voice calm. "Stay with me." She nodded, swallowing back a sob. He stared out the barred window at the receding park, the place of serenity, now a crime scene. At the precinct, they were ushered into a dimly lit booking room. A photographer flashed, and a clerk recited a string of charges: resisting arrest, obstruction, even assault on an officer. Chuck's jaw tightened. None of it was true, and they both knew it. Maria's protests were cut short as the clerk handed her paper and pen. "Sign here," he instructed. Maria's hand trembled, but she obeyed. Chuck refused, eyes locked on the officer who'd ordered the tasering. "This is unlawful," he said softly, but loud enough to echo off the grimy walls. The arresting officer smirked. "Not up to you," he replied, slamming Chuck's signature onto the clipboard. Another officer snapped on rubber gloves and began a cursory search, treating Chuck like any common criminal. Maria winced again at the brushing of the latex against her burned skin. Chuck bristled, but held his ground. He refused to give them the satisfaction of his anger. Once processed, they were led to adjacent holding cells, separated by a thin metal door with a barred window. Chuck pounded on the divider. Maria's eyes met his through the bars, fierce despite her pain. He mouthed, "I'll get you out." Outside, the corrupt unit shared triumphant smiles, confident they'd sent a message. But Chuck's unspoken vow hung in the stale air. This arrest would not be their last word. Even in the dim light of the holding cell, Chuck's mind raced. He paced the narrow concrete floor, each step echoing with frustration. Maria sat on the bench, her body curled against the cold wall, eyes closed as she fought the pain. Chuck knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "I need to know why," he murmured. She opened her eyes, exhaustion mixing with resolve. "They won't tell us anything." Hours slipped by with only the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of other prisoners' chains. Chuck pressed his face against the bars, peering down the corridor. The booking desk was deserted, the officers gone. Every corridor he glanced down seemed empty, as if the entire station had swallowed up the answers along with the officers. A guard finally appeared, keys jangling. He unlocked Chuck's cell and motioned curtly. "Visitation," he said, leading him to a small room separated by thick glass. On the other side sat a woman in a tailored suit, her expression sympathetic but guarded. "I'm your attorney," she introduced herself quietly. Chuck sank into the chair. "Thank God," he said. "Tell me what they've charged us with and why." She tapped her pen against the file. "Officially, they're citing assault and obstruction. There's video footage." Chuck's heart sank. They'd manipulated cameras. "What about the taser?" "That wasn't in any report." The attorney's eyes flicked downward. "It wasn't officially documented. They've labeled your wife's injuries as self-inflicted." Chuck felt cold fury. "They tossed her." She exhaled slowly. "I know. I've spoken to Internal Affairs. They're claiming jurisdictional confusion. It's a thin cover." Chuck clenched his fists. "So no one will say why they did it." She shook her head. "Not until you push." But pushing could backfire. Chuck rose, restlessness burning him. They can't hide behind protocol forever. He returned to Maria's cell. She looked up, eyes wary. "Any news?" "Nothing official," he answered, voice low. "But we won't stop." She managed a small, grateful smile. Together, outside, the station clock ticked on, each second a reminder that they were trapped in a web of lies. But Chuck Norris wasn't about to let unanswered questions stand between him and justice. Chuck leaned against the cold metal door, the echo of his footsteps fading as he stepped into the narrow corridor. Maria sat on the bench, wrist aching from the sudden jolt of pain searing through her chest. He knelt beside her, voice low and urgent. "We need backup. Someone who can expose what they're hiding." Her eyes softened with trust. "Call Walker." Chuck nodded. "He knows how to handle dirty cops." He pressed a hidden button on his phone, the screen lighting up with one name, Walker. Within moments, he whispered the details into the receiver. Every word carried weight. The tasering, the bogus charges, the silence that swallowed their questions. While Chuck spoke, Maria studied the bruising forming beneath her blouse. She swallowed, drawing strength from Chuck's unwavering calm. "He'll get you out," Chuck assured her, pressing her hand. The call ended, and Chuck pocketed his phone. He paced, mind racing through possible scenarios. Walker was unorthodox, but his network ran deep into police oversight divisions. Minutes later, a distant commotion echoed down the hall. Chuck braced himself as two officers approached, flanking a tall man in civilian clothes. The man's posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Charles Norris?" he asked, voice calm. Chuck straightened. "That's me." The man showed a discreet badge. "Internal Affairs. I'm Agent Walker." Maria's breath caught. Chuck stood protectively at her side. Walker gave a curt nod to the officers, who stepped back. "I've reviewed preliminary reports. There are inconsistencies." Chuck's chest tightened. "We need your help." Walker's gaze flicked to Maria's chest. "I'm deploying a team. We'll gather all unedited footage, eyewitness statements, medical reports. No stone left unturned." Maria let out a breath, relief and pain mingling in her eyes. Chuck placed a steady hand on Walker's shoulder. "Thank you." Walker met his gaze. "Justice demands truth. I'll get you out and expose those responsible." As Walker's team moved down the corridor, securing evidence from every corner of the station, Chuck and Maria shared a brief, determined glance. The corruption hiding behind badges would soon face the light, and together they would make sure the officers who crossed the line never forgot whose family they targeted. Every nerve in Maria's body screamed as the second taser blast hit her shoulder, radiating fire through muscle and bone. She gasped, eyes flying open as the world trembled around her. Chuck's heart lurched. One moment she'd been standing between him and the precinct's interrogation room. The next, her knees buckled under the unseen force that knocked the breath out of her. He lunged forward, but Walker's team moved in, shields raised to protect evidence. Maria collapsed, forehead hitting the concrete floor with a dull thud. Chuck cradled her head in his arms, pressing gentle fingers against the wound. Her vision went black at the edges, pain and confusion swirling together. "Stay with me," Chuck muttered, voice raw. An officer barked a command, but Walker cut him off, voice unwavering. "Medical. Now." For sets of boots pounded closer as EMTs pushed through, carrying a stretcher and a portable defibrillator. Maria's breathing came in ragged breaths, each one a victory over the electric storm ripping through her body. Chuck watched, every second stretching into an eternity. Walker knelt to inspect the taser carriage. "This officer's trigger was pulled deliberately," he said quietly, eyes narrowing. "That's assault." The officers around them shifted uneasily, uniforms suddenly too heavy, badges suddenly too conspicuous. Maria's eyes fluttered, focusing on Chuck. A single tear traced a line down her cheek. "I didn't see it coming," she whispered. Chuck brushed the hair from her face. "They'll pay for this," he promised. The EMTs loaded Maria onto the stretcher, securing straps over her legs and torso. Chuck rose with her, gripping her hand and refusing to let go. As they wheeled her away toward the station's small medical bay, Walker's team fanned out, cameras clicking as they recorded every reaction, every whispered apology too late. Chuck walked beside the stretcher, eyes fixed on Maria's pale face. He caught Walker's gaze briefly. Understanding passed between them without a word. Justice would come, not just for the taser wounds, but for the betrayal of trust he'd witnessed. In the sterile glow of the medical bay, Chuck stayed at Maria's side while doctors treated her burns. Every touch from them, gloves brushing her skin, reminded him of the injustice. Yet beneath his anger, a calm resolve took root. They had documented assault, secured evidence, and ensured no lie could survive. And when Maria healed, they would stand together, determined to dismantle the corruption that dared to strike his wife. The hospital room was hushed except for the steady beep of monitors. Chuck sat beside Maria's bed, her arm wrapped in gauze and cooling gel. He watched the dull bruise blossom beneath the bandages, the color shifting from angry red to purple. Maria's eyes were closed, exhaustion etched on her face. He reviewed every moment in his mind: the unprovoked taser, the false arrest, the station's stony silence. Something didn't add up. Why target Maria so aggressively? The obvious answer, corruption, only scratched the surface. There had to be more. Chuck bowed his head, running a hand through his hair. As Maria stirred, he straightened. She blinked, focusing on him. "I've been thinking," he began gently. She waited, bracing herself against the pillows. This wasn't random. They knew who we were. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "You think it's personal?" she whispered. Chuck nodded. Someone on that unit wanted to send a message. Not just to us, but to anyone who might stand against them. He tapped the hospital-issued tablet that held Walker's preliminary report. "Look at these names. Officers with sudden promotions, unexplained commendations. One chief detective with ties to a private security firm funded by offshore accounts." Maria's brow furrowed. "They're in someone's pocket." Chuck's jaw set. "Exactly. And their arrogance tonight wasn't just bravado. It was confidence. Confidence built on knowing they had powerful backing." He glanced at the window, where dusk painted the sky in deep blues. "We're dealing with more than a local rogue unit." Maria drew in a shaky breath. "That means going after the boss, not just the foot soldiers." Chuck's gaze hardened. "We need to trace those accounts, find who's financing them, and expose the entire chain. If we pull on that thread, everything unravels." She reached for his hand. "Then we know what we have to do." Chuck squeezed her hand, pride mixing with fierce protectiveness. "Walker's pulling in financial analysts tonight. We'll follow the money, and we'll follow the truth." As night settled outside, Chuck stared at the ceiling, determination burning in his chest. This was no longer just about clearing their names. It was about shining a light on a network of corruption so deep they dared to brutalize his wife. And once the realization had taken hold, there was no turning back. The conference room was dim, the blinds pulled tight against prying eyes. At the long table sat Chuck Norris, Maria Norris, Agent Walker, and two financial analysts hunched over laptops. Mountains of printed bank statements, money transfer logs, and shell company records were strewn across the polished surface. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and determination. Walker tapped a spreadsheet on his screen. These transactions, hundreds of thousands moving through Cayman accounts, then funneled back as operational expenses for the precinct. One analyst clicked a link to wire transfer forms. "Look here, Payne and Caldwell Security, listed as a private contractor for advanced training. But there's no office, no employees, just a mailbox in a warehouse district." Maria leaned forward. "So the officers we dealt with were essentially pawns for a private entity laundering money through the department." Chuck's steady gaze flicked between the analysts. "And the money trail leads to a name?" The second analyst nodded, typing furiously. "Margaret Reynolds. She holds controlling shares in Payne and Caldwell. She's on the city's oversight board and has political ties at City Hall." Walker's eyes narrowed. Powerful and untouchable until now. Chuck's voice was quiet but resolute. "We need hard evidence. Contracts, emails, anything that ties Reynolds to the precinct's budget allocations." Maria tapped her pen. "And we need to know who at City Hall is pulling her strings." Walker adjusted his glasses. "I've got warrants ready to serve at dawn. Search and seizure at her properties and digital assets. We'll seize phones, servers, everything." A knock on the door interrupted them. Two uniformed officers entered, carrying folders marked confidential. They placed them in front of Walker. "Surveillance footage from precinct cameras, unedited," one said. Walker skimmed the clips, Officers conspiring in the parking lot, passing envelopes, laughing at CCTV monitors showing Chuck and Maria in the park. One officer even pocketed the taser cartridges. Maria's hand tightened around Chuck's. They planned every detail, she murmured. Chuck stood, the room suddenly feeling too small for his determination. Then we expose it all. Walker sank back, eyes fierce. Tomorrow, we go public. The DA will put out a press release. City Hall won't know what hit them. Maria rose too, wincing slightly at the burn on her shoulder. Chuck dropped his voice to a steady whisper. Behind closed doors ends tonight. As they gathered the evidence, the walls seemed to close in on the corruption festering within. But Chuck Norris and his allies were ready to tear them down, one damning document at a time. The early morning sun barely pierced the gray skies as Chuck and Walker's team converged on Payne and Caldwell's unmarked warehouse. Flashing badges and a barrage of warrants gave the officers pause, their earlier confidence replaced by nervous glances. Chuck Norris stood at the front, arms folded, surveying the scene. Maria watched from the armored SUV, the burn on her shoulder stinging with every jolt as they rolled over potholes. Inside the warehouse, crates stamped with coded numbers lined the walls. IT specialists plugged into servers stacked in metal racks, extracting emails and encrypted communications. Walker's agents moved swiftly, sealing off exits and corralling sleepy staff into a makeshift holding area. Tension crackled in the stale air as the precinct officers, caught off guard, found themselves outmatched by the precision of the raid. An older lieutenant, one of the corrupt unit's ringleaders, shoved a young tech aside. "What's this?" "You can't." Walker stepped forward, badge in hand. "You can and we will. You're all under arrest for money laundering, abuse of power, and conspiracy." The lieutenant's face blanched. Chuck advanced, voice calm but carrying. "You targeted an innocent woman. You framed us. Now you'll answer for every lie." The lieutenant's bravado faltered. He spat defiantly. "You'll never prove official sanction." Maria stepped out of the SUV, wincing slightly but mounting the stairs nonetheless. She joined Chuck at his side, her presence steel wrapped in grace. "We already have," she said, nodding toward the analyst hauling evidence into crates. Suddenly, an officer lunged for a shotgun behind the counter. Chuck reacted instantly, disarming the man with a precise strike that sent the weapon skidding across the concrete floor. The baton raised above the officer's head never landed. Chuck's grip on the man's wrist was unyielding, his eyes sharp. "You're done," he stated simply. The remaining officers froze, eyes darting between Chuck's unflinching stance and the mounting mountain of evidence. Walker's team corralled them with practiced efficiency, snapping cuffs into place. As the last officer was let out, Maria exhaled, relief softening her features. Chuck turned to her, offering a gentle smile despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. Outside, news helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing every moment. Chuck Norris stood amid the crumbling facade of corruption, shoulder to shoulder with his wife. This was the first showdown, but it felt like the crack in the dam. And with that opening, justice would flood through. The precinct was eerily quiet when Chuck and Maria returned later that afternoon. Where once the hallways buzzed with activity, now even the clerks exchanged reduced glances and hushed whispers. Officers who had once smirked as they booked the Norrises now avoided eye contact, scurrying past with heads down. The power balance had shifted. Chuck moved through the station with calm determination, Maria at his side. Every step echoed off the tiled floor, a reminder that they were no longer guests but investigators. At the front desk, the clerk slid a folder across without a word. Chuck picked it up, noticing the official seal stamped over DA Inquiry. Inside were memos detailing internal affairs, ongoing probes, witness statements from the warehouse raid, and a schedule of planned interviews. They made their way to Walker's office, the doors left ajar. Inside, Agent Walker and his team worked in focused silence, sifting through digital logs and phone records. One analyst looked up and offered a small nod. No celebratory chatter, just the steady hum of computers and the rustle of papers. Maria's gaze drifted to a wall-mounted monitor looping footage from the park incident. The moment the taser fired, the stunned expressions, Chuck's controlled response. She swallowed, remembering the shock of that day. Chuck placed a reassuring hand on her back before turning to Walker. What's next? Walker tapped a sequence on his keyboard, building the case file, then presenting it to the special prosecutor. The DA wants this airtight before moving forward. He paused, meeting Chuck's eyes. Your presence kept them honest today. Without you, they'd stonewall every request. Chuck nodded. He glanced at the hallway, where officers paused briefly at the doorway before shuffling away. Their silence was louder than any protest. Silence can speak volumes, he said softly. Let it hang until they decide where their loyalty lies. They spent the next hour reviewing logs, identifying complicity at higher levels. Mayoral aides, an oversight board member, even a judge rumored to have accepted favors. Each discovery was a quiet bombshell detonating in the hush of Walker's office. When they finally stepped back into the hallway, the station felt transformed. The empty stairs were no longer intimidation, but consequence. Chuck and Maria walked side by side, their resolve unshaken. The corrupt officers may have wielded silence as a shield, but soon they would have nothing left to hide. The evidence file on Walker's desk had grown fat overnight, each document a testament to the corruption they were unearthing. Chuck stood by the window, the city skyline blurred by rain, fingers tapping lightly against the glass. Maria joined him, her shoulder burning beneath the jacket she wore again. The tempest outside mirrored the one gathering around them. In the conference room, Walker laid out a timeline. Internal affairs investigations, financial forensics, witness interviews, all converging on a looming press conference. We go public in 48 hours, he announced. That gives us time to prepare statements and secure witness protection. Chuck studied the map of precincts, deputies, and political offices. They'll strike back, he warned. Expect leaks, intimidation tactics. Walker nodded, already seeing it. Anonymous threats to key witnesses. A smear campaign brewing. Maria closed her eyes, drawing strength from the shared resolve. They won't scare us away, she said, voice steady. If they think shutting us up will stop the truth, they're mistaken. Chuck placed a hand on her shoulder, pride and concern warring in his gaze. We stand together. Always. Outside, thunder rolled like distant drums. Inside, the air hummed with purpose. Analysts traced digital footprints through encrypted channels. Legal teams drafted subpoenas for city officials. Protective details arranged safe houses for whistleblowers. Every piece moved them closer to exposing the sprawling network. Walker paused the flurry of activity with a raised hand. We need unity, he said. When we announce, it must feel unbreakable. No factional dissent, no gaps for them to exploit. Chuck and Maria exchanged a look. They understood the gravity. This wasn't just their fight. It was a moment that could redefine accountability in the city. As evening settled in, Chuck stepped out into the hallway. Officers moved past, some avoiding his gaze, others offering curt nods. The storm's first drops of rain swept in through the open door, cold and insistent. Chuck inhaled deeply, feeling the electric tension coalesce. Behind every closed door, behind every silent glance, the corrupt forces were gathering their own storm to counterattack. But Chuck Norris and Maria would not relent. With every threat they anticipated, every strategy they refined, the gathering storm only strengthened their resolve. And when the curtain rose on the truth, no amount of thunder or lightning would blind the city to the justice they demanded. The tension finally snapped late that night. Chuck was reviewing last-minute witness statements when the power cut out, plunging the precinct into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows down the corridors. He reached for his phone, only to find it dead. Silence pressed in, heavy and unnerving. Maria's voice crackled over the radio. Chuck, you there? Relief flooded him. I'm here. What's happening? Static followed before her response. They're rounding up our witnesses. I saw unmarked cruisers pulling into safe houses. His gut twisted. This was it. their enemies making a desperate move. He raced through the darkened station, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Walker's team was already mobilizing, but reports came in faster than they could respond. A whistleblower's car forced off the road, another's front door rammed in by masked officers. The storm outside matched the chaos within. Rain hammered the windows, thunder shook the walls. Chuck burst into the makeshift command center. Walker's face was pale under the emergency light. "They're trying to destroy the network," Walker said. "If they silence the witnesses, our case collapses." Chuck's jaw clenched. "Then we protect them ourselves." He grabbed a list of addresses and handed it to Maria. "Lead the convoy. I'll handle the precinct." She nodded, determination in her eyes despite the exhaustion. Outside, engines roared to life. Chuck established a perimeter inside the station, ordering officers still loyal to truth to escort fleeing witnesses through back exits. Every second counted as masked men battered down doors, shouting orders, trampling over evidence crates. In the chaos, a senior detective, one of the few unsullied, grabbed Chuck's arm. "They've got a warrant for you. They're calling you an accessory." Chuck met his gaze, unwavering. "Then we'll fight it here." He stormed toward the main doors, only to find them sealed. A squad of corrupt officers blocked the exit, guns drawn, faces hidden behind rain-soaked hoods. The corridor stilled, the only sound the patter of water dripping through a cracked skylight. Chuck stepped forward, voice calm but steel sharp. "Let them go." The officers hesitated, trigger fingers twitching. Thunder rolled overhead, and in that charged moment, Chuck Norris stood unbowed, embodying every ounce of discipline and resolve he had. This was the breaking point, where courage met crisis, and only one would stand unbroken. A single shot of lightning illuminated the sealed precinct entrance just as Chuck squared off against the corrupt officers. Time seemed suspended until the heavy steel door behind him creaked open. A figure stepped through, Lieutenant Ramirez, one of the unit's most respected detectives, rainwater dripping from his badge. His uniform was still, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Lower your weapons," he ordered, voice steady. The corrupt officers exchanged confused glances, guns wavering. Ramirez held up a stack of files. "I have proof they ordered the raids on our safe houses. I've been gathering evidence in secret." Maria and Walker emerged from the shadows beside Chuck, relief flooding their faces. Ramirez strode forward, placing the files on a nearby countertop. He met Chuck's gaze. "I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy everything we built. I'm done covering for them." A murmur rose among the corrupt officers as Ramirez handed the documents to Walker. They manipulated city funds, threatened witnesses, and even forged warrants. "It's all here." Walker leafed through the files. Authenticated emails, recorded conversations, GPS logs showing unmarked cruisers at Ramirez's own home. "This is gold," he said. "You risked everything." Ramirez shrugged, disappointment etched in his features. "I watched them taser a defenseless woman. I swore to protect my community, not terrorize it." The corrupt officers hesitated, their confidence crumbling. One raised his pistol again, but Ramirez's hand went to his sidearm faster. "Don't make me do this," he warned. The officer froze, eyes flicking to the lieutenant's badge, now tarnished by truth. Chuck stepped forward, voice calm but authoritative. "We'll handle them. You helped us find the heart of the corruption." Ramirez nodded. "Then let's finish this." With a silent nod from Walker, precinct security and loyal officers moved in, securing the remaining corrupt men with professional precision. Outside, the storm raged, rain sluicing down the windows, as if washing away the precinct's sins. Walker closed the door behind him, sliding the final set of cuffs into place. Ramirez exhaled, relief and resolve mingling in his stance. Maria reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. As the rain subsided, Chuck looked at their unexpected ally. "You did the right thing," he told Ramirez. The lieutenant offered a small, tired smile. "Just hoping it's not too late." Chuck's expression was firm. It's never too late to choose honor. Together, they prepared to expose the rest of the conspiracy and to restore justice to a city on the brink. The city buzzed with anticipation as word of the upcoming press conference spread. Media vans lined the curb outside City Hall, satellite dishes reaching skyward like metallic flowers. Chuck and Maria arrived early, escorted by Walker and Lieutenant Ramirez. Behind them trailed a cadre of witnesses whose lives had been upended by the corrupt unit's actions. Inside the grand chamber, long wooden benches filled with journalists, city officials, and curious onlookers. At the front, a podium stood draped with the city's seal, flanked by screens ready to display damning evidence. Tension hummed in the air, each attendee aware that what happened next could upend careers and reputations. Chuck scanned the room, noting the absentees, key figures who'd been instrumental in the cover-up. Their no-shows spoke volumes. Maria stood beside him, her shoulder still healing beneath the tailored blazer. She caught his eye, and they shared a moment of silent solidarity. This was their moment to reclaim the narrative. Walker and Ramirez joined them, finalizing details with the special prosecutor. Documents were organized in neat stacks, digital files preloaded on the screens. The special prosecutor, a poised woman with steely resolve, gave Chuck a nod. "Ready when you are." Maria exhaled, fingers curling lightly around Chuck's hand. A hush fell as the prosecutor took the podium first, outlining the scope of the investigation: financial fraud, witness intimidation, abuse of power. Her words were measured but forceful, setting the stage. Then Ramirez stepped up, presenting the stack of documents tracing money flows and forged warrants. He clicked a remote, and the first slide appeared: emails bearing the precinct chief's signature, approving illicit expenditures. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Chuck watched the reactions, the tightened lips of City Hall aides, the widened eyes of reporters. Maria stood tall, her steady presence amplifying the gravity of each revelation. Walker adjusted the volume on a concealed speaker, ushering in the audio of a recorded conversation between corrupt officers plotting the park incident. A hush deeper than before fell over the crowd as the officers' own voices damned them. As the final piece of evidence, a video clip of Maria's tasering, played on the screen, gasps echoed. Chuck felt the room's energy shift from skepticism to shock. The tension that had been building broke like a dam. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived. The aftermath of the press conference left the city reeling. Headlines screamed of betrayal and misconduct. Chuck stepped off the stage into a flurry of flashbulbs, reporters clamoring for statements. He let Maria walk ahead, her strength despite pain drawing admiration. Walker and Ramirez flanked them, eyes vigilant for any threat. Their victory was immediate but fragile. Within hours, anonymous threats began, a bullet casing on Maria's driveway, veiled warnings scrawled on voicemail. City Hall aides disavowed knowledge, shifting blame to rogue elements. Chuck recognized the tactic: lay low in public, strike where hurts most in private. Late that evening, Chuck gathered the core team in Walker's makeshift command center. Maps of potential safe houses, contingency routes, and emergency contacts covered the walls. "They're turning this into a war of attrition," Walker said, voice grim. "They'll keep pushing until we break." Ramirez tapped his pen against a file. "They've got resources, money, influence, manpower. We need to stay 2 steps ahead." Maria, seated at a conference table, winced as she shifted in her chair. "They think fear will silence us," she said, voice firm. "But we know their game. We expose every move." Chuck met her gaze, pride and worry mingling in his eyes. "Then we set the board our way." He outlined a plan: rotate secure locations for the witnesses, leak select documents to trusted journalists to keep public pressure high, and covertly gather intelligence on the syndicate's enablers in City Hall. Night fell, and the team dispersed into the city's underbelly. Ramirez blending with patrols to monitor precinct movements, Walker coordinating digital sweeps to trace hacking attempts. Chuck and Maria moving quietly between safe havens, checking on witnesses, an underground network pulsing with cautious hope. A call crackled through Walker's radio. An informant spotted a suspicious meeting at an abandoned factory on the city's outskirts. The location reeked of ambush, but the opportunity was too critical to ignore. Chuck assembled a small retrieval unit, himself, Ramirez, and 2 trusted agents. As they drove through deserted streets, headlights slicing through darkness, Maria watched from a rooftop lookout, radio pressed to her ear. This was the dangerous game. Shadows and whispers, risk and resolve. Every step could be their last, every decision a potential trap. But Chuck Norris and his allies had chosen the board, and they intended to checkmate corruption once and for all. Late that night, Chuck and Maria slipped into their suburban home, expecting the quiet sanctuary of family life. Instead, headlights danced across the drawn curtains, and muffled voices echoed in the driveway. Chuck's muscles tensed as he motioned for Maria to stay low. Through the living room window, they saw 2 black SUVs parked near the garage, doors open. Figures in dark tactical gear fanned out, moving with practiced precision. Maria's hand found Chuck's, her voice barely a whisper. "They're here." He stepped into the foyer, every sense alert. A shattered flower pot lay on the welcome mat, an unmistakable warning. Chuck ushered Maria toward the back door, but a flash of movement caught his eye. Their teenage daughter, Kayla, crouched by the stairs, phone in hand, face pale with fear. "Daddy," she called softly. Chuck crossed the room in 2 strides, scooping Kayla into his arms. "We're getting out," he said, eyes flicking to Maria. She nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. Together, they hustled to the back, but the side door burst open before they reached it. Masked intruders flooded the kitchen, weapons drawn. Chuck pivoted, using the counter as cover. One assailant raised an automatic rifle, but Ramirez and 2 agents crashed through the sliding glass door behind them. In a blur of disciplined motion, they neutralized the threat. Bullets pinged against the tile floor as Chuck blocked a punch and disarmed another attacker. Maria ducked behind the island, pressing Kayla against her side. Within seconds, the intruders were subdued, pinned to the ground under the agent's knees. Kayla's eyes filled with tears, and Maria held her close, voice soothing. Chuck surveyed the scene. The danger had come straight to their doorstep. Outside, sirens wailed as Walker's backup arrived, cuffing the masked men and hauling them off into the night. Maria exhaled, relief and lingering fear mixing. "They wanted to scare us," she said, voice trembling. Chuck knelt beside Kayla, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "They won't break us," he promised. As the family huddled in the safety of their home, the reality settled in. Their fight against corruption wasn't just professional. It was profoundly personal. But united, they would stand firm against any threat, protecting each other and the truth they sought to defend. Late that evening, Chuck and Maria gathered in the living room, Kayla safe with a trusted neighbor. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a tense hush. Walker's earlier warning replayed in Chuck's mind. They'll escalate. Now he understood just how far. A notification pinged on Chuck's secure line, a video file. He tapped it open. The grainy footage showed their home's exterior as a drone hovered overhead. Then the camera zoomed in on Kayla through her bedroom window, the screen freezing on her startled face. A distorted voice followed. One more move, and she becomes collateral. Maria's breath caught. Her gaze snapped to Chuck. He swallowed past anger and fear, mind racing through options. This was the line they'd crossed, threatening his daughter. Everything else paled in comparison. He stood, voice low but fierce. "They've gone too far." Maria stepped close, hand resting on his arm. "What do we do?" Chuck closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. "We exposed them fully." He grabbed his laptop and began compiling the video, timestamps, and associated metadata. Walker and Ramirez needed this immediately. In a makeshift command center, the team sprang into action. Walker's face hardened as he reviewed the footage. "This is blackmail and kidnapping by proxy," he said. "We'll send it to every major network and law enforcement agency. Public outrage will force them to back down." Ramirez overlaid the drone's flight path on a city map. "We traced its signal," came from an airfield owned by the same shell company funding the precinct unit. Chuck's jaw set. Then we hit them where it hurts, their reputation and wallets. He drafted a secure message to the media and legal authorities, attaching the evidence and demanding immediate protection orders for Kayla. As dawn approached, the city woke to headlines about the chilling threat against Chuck Norris's daughter. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended within minutes. Public pressure surged, and executives at Payne and Caldwell began distancing themselves. City Hall aides issued statements condemning the act, promising full cooperation. Back at home, Chuck watched Kayla's relief as Walker's detail installed additional security measures. Maria wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. Chuck joined them, voice gentle. "They thought fear would stop us," he said softly. Kayla nodded, eyes bright. "But we're stronger together." In that moment, the ultimate threat had only served to unite them further. And with every new ally rallying to their side, the corrupt network's days were numbered. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as the final hearing on the precinct's misconduct began. City officials, legal teams, and a horde of media outlets pressed in, phones and cameras trained on the defendants. Chuck Norris and Maria sat in the front row, Kayla beside them under a witness protection alias. Behind the defense table, the corrupt officers shifted nervously, their arrogance peeled away by the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. As the special prosecutor laid out the damning findings, financial fraud, witness tampering, and the drone threat, Chuck rose from his seat. A hush rippled through the chamber. He walked forward with measured steps, each stride echoing his unwavering resolve. At the podium, he paused, locking eyes with the lead officer who'd tossed Maria first. The man's confident facade cracked under Chuck's calm intensity. Chuck inhaled, then spoke in a voice that rang like tempered steel. "You wore your badges with pride, sworn to protect and serve. Instead, you chose fear and violence. Tonight, you will learn that true strength doesn't come from power over others, but from the courage to stand by truth when everyone else turns away." His words sliced through the murmurs, freezing every whispered doubt in the room. The lead officer swallowed hard. Maria's gaze met Chuck's, gratitude and awe shining in her eyes. Even the presiding judge leaned forward, struck by the clarity in his words. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment justice found its voice. Chuck continued, "You believed you could hide behind protocol, but protocol twisted by corruption is nothing more than a shackle on the innocent. When you attacked my wife, you thought no one would notice. When you threatened my daughter, you thought I would back down. You were wrong." The officer's shoulders slumped, their silent guilt more damning than any testimony. He stepped back, hands unclenching at his sides. "Let this be a lesson. Respect is earned, not demanded. And when you betray that respect, you invite the very scrutiny you hoped to avoid." The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the echo of his final words hanging like a verdict of their own. In that charged moment, the corrupt officers realized the true cost of their actions and the power of words spoken with unwavering conviction. Chuck returned to the witness stand, composed and steady. The courtroom had buzzed with tension, but now, as he settled into the hard wooden chair, a quiet calm settled over the proceedings. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the significance of each gesture. Maria watched from the gallery, her hand resting on Kayla's shoulder. Both drew strength from Chuck's unwavering poise. The defense attempted one last bid, accusing Chuck of overstepping his bounds, inflaming public opinion to obscure the facts. They cited sound bites, selective clips, and sensational headlines, hoping to cloud the truth with noise. But as counsel questioned him, Chuck neither flinched nor raised his voice. His answers were measured, factual, delivered in controlled tones that carried weight beyond words. When asked why he spoke so openly in the press, Chuck met the attorney's gaze evenly. "Silence allows injustice to flourish," he replied simply. The room hushed. The notion that complacency enables wrongdoing resonated more deeply than any outraged rebuttal. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judges and jurors exchanged reflective looks. Later, Maria spoke quietly with the special prosecutor. "How did he do it?" she asked, astonished. The prosecutor smiled. He turned emotional testimony into a strategic asset. His calm conviction forced everyone here to confront their own biases and the ugly truth they try to hide. Maria nodded, pride and relief mingling in her eyes. Back on the stand, Chuck described the impact of the corruption on ordinary lives, the fear sparked by a taser blast, the terror of threats against a child, the uncertainty of facing fabricated charges. His tone never wavered, yet each word carried a resonance that no raised voice could match. He explained how calm, deliberate action had guided his response, first to gather evidence, then to protect his family, and finally to shine a light on the conspiracy. As he concluded, Chuck's final statement was delivered in a voice so steady it felt like a promise. True strength is not measured by how loudly one shouts or how forcefully one strikes. It is measured by the resolve to uphold justice with integrity, even when every force opposes you. When he stepped down, the courtroom exhaled. The power of his calm had dismantled the defense's theatrics, leaving only undeniable truth. Maria rose to embrace Chuck, and Kayla joined them, forming a circle of resilience. In that moment, it was clear that composure could conquer chaos, and that genuine strength lay in the measured stillness at the heart of the storm. The evening before the final verdict, Chuck stood on the terrace of their home overlooking the quiet neighborhood. The sky was painted in soft hues of twilight, an almost peaceful canvas belying the turbulence to come. Maria joined him, her arm resting lightly on his back. Between them, a gentle hush settled, a moment suspended outside time. Inside, Kayla flipped through a textbook under the glow of a desk lamp, her homework untouched at the thought of tomorrow. Chuck glanced at her through the open sliding door. She looked up, offering a small, determined smile. He nodded, then turned back to Maria. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said softly. She traced the lines of his jaw, her expression calm but resolute. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Their breath mingled in the cooling air, and for a few precious minutes, the weight of investigations, threats, and courtroom battles lifted. They allowed themselves to simply be husband and wife, partners in a fight that had transformed into a crusade. Behind them, the house held the quiet rhythm of family life. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the living room clock, the gentle creak of floorboards as a security agent made his final rounds. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Chuck inhaled deeply, letting the cool air steady his pulse. "This calm won't last," he murmured, "but it reminds me why we're doing this." Maria rested her head on his shoulder. "For justice, and for our daughter." They stood in respectful silence, drawing strength from each other. The world beyond their walls was gearing up for a storm of verdicts and consequences, but here, in the twilight's soft glow, hope persisted. As the last light faded, Chuck took Maria's hand and led her back inside. Kayla shut her book and joined them, slipping her arms around both parents. The moment felt sacred, a brief sanctuary before the storm. And in that calm, they found the courage they would need when the tempest finally broke. The courtroom doors swung open as the jury filed in, faces somber and resolute. Chuck, Maria, and Kayla sat together, hands clasped, their collective pulse echoing the weight of the moment. Opposing them, the defense team exchanged tense glances. Outside, the storm Chuck had predicted finally broke. Raindrops pattered against the high windows, punctuating the gravity inside. The judge's gavel fell, demanding attention. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked. Foreman rose, clearing his throat. "We have, Your Honor." Maria squeezed Chuck's hand so gently it was almost imperceptible, yet full of shared strength. The foreman unfolded the slip of paper. "On the charges of corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of power, we find the defendants guilty on all counts." A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. The sound of thunder rolled in harmony, as if nature itself approved the verdict. A hush ensued, then an eruption of murmurs, camera shutters clicking, and reporters shouting questions. Chuck rose, protective and composed, guiding Maria and Kayla to stand beside him. Walker and Ramirez exchanged satisfied looks. Months of unrelenting pursuit had culminated in this moment. The judge's sharp knock restored order. "The court thanks you for your service," he addressed the jurors. Turning to the defendants, he pronounced sentence: years of combined prison terms, restitution for misappropriated funds, and permanent dismissal from law enforcement. The former officers' faces drained of color as they were led away in cuffs. Outside the courtroom, rain slicked the pavement, reflecting streetlights in trembling pools. Chuck stepped onto the courthouse steps, Maria at his side, Kayla wrapping her arms around them both. Flashbulbs illuminated their relief and exhaustion. Chuck raised a hand in a quiet wave to the gathered crowd. Reporters, supporters, and witnesses who had risked everything to stand for truth. A bolt of lightning split the sky overhead. Maria shivered, and Chuck draped his jacket around her shoulders. Kayla pressed closer, looking up at her father. "Did we win?" she whispered. Chuck knelt, meeting her gaze. "We did," he affirmed softly. "We stood together, and justice prevailed." As they descended the steps into the storm, drenched but undeterred, Chuck Norris's family knew the final battle had been won. The storm raged around them, but inside, their unity shone brighter than any verdict, proof that courage, conviction, and calm could conquer even the darkest corruption. In the days following the verdict, the city began to heal. News outlets aired retrospectives on the case, highlighting the courage of the witnesses and the integrity of those who fought for truth. Chuck, Maria, and Kayla walked the park where it all began, sunlight filtering through the trees in gentle shafts. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of corruption had finally lifted. Maria paused by the bench where she was first confronted. Chuck stood beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. "This place," she said softly, "it's different now." He nodded. "It marks where everything changed. Even the darkest moment led us here." Kayla, skipping ahead, found the spot where her mother had fallen. She knelt, touching the earth as if paying respect. Word of reforms swept through the precinct. New leadership was sworn in, committed to transparency and community engagement. Policies on use of force were rewritten, officers underwent renewed ethics training, and an independent watchdog committee was established. Ramirez, promoted to interim chief, oversaw the changes, ensuring the precinct would never return to its old ways. In City Hall, Mayor Alvarez announced a series of integrity pledges signed by every council member, pledges that carried real penalties for breach. Margaret Reynolds faced federal charges for her role in the laundering scheme, her empire unraveling as assets were seized. The tide had definitively turned. Chuck watched the press conference on television, Maria curled against him on the couch. Kayla sat between them, eyes bright with hope. "We made a difference," she said, voice brimming with pride. Chuck kissed her temple. "Yes, we did. And you led the way." That evening, the family returned home to find a simple package waiting on their doorstep. A weathered copy of a book by Justice Holmes, inscribed, "To those who stand for what's right, no matter the cost." Inside, a note, "Keep turning the tide." As dusk deepened, Chuck lit a lantern on the porch. The gentle glow illuminated three silhouettes: father, mother, daughter, standing united against an uncertain world. They had reached the turning point, not just in a case, but in a community's conscience.